Welcome to Be the Best You. I'm your host, Luke Briggs. So how does someone who grows up in one of the most crime-infested areas of Chicago make something out of his life? Just ask Michael Johnson. Growing up as a child, Michael got shot, had many friends and family members die, and was in an area filled with gangs, drugs, and prostitution. To further paint the picture, he's one of only 4 kids out of 23 in his elementary school class who's still alive today. Academically, Michael overcame illiteracy to graduate with a master's degree in business. Despite all the challenges, Michael says his life experiences have shaped him into the man he is today. He helps thousands of children and families as the CEO of one of the fastest growing boys and girls clubs in the United States and has become a true leader of all people, regardless of race or income status. I sat down with Michael, and he shared his incredible journey of going from broke and hopeless to becoming a life-changing CEO. If you get any value out of this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would share this episode, subscribe to the podcast, and give it a 5-star review to help the show grow and reach more people. Now sit back and enjoy this episode with CEO and leader, Michael Johnson. All right, I'm here today with Michael Johnson. Michael has one of the most amazing stories you'll hear. He overcame a really tough childhood, growing up in the projects of Chicago, and graduated from one of the lowest performing high schools in the state of Illinois. We're talking about being in an area filled with gangs, drugs, prostitution. In fact, Michael is one of only 4 kids out of the 23 in his graduating class in elementary school who is still alive today. Yet he's found a way to break through these obstacles to become a life-changing CEO for one of the fastest growing boys and girls clubs in the entire United States. Since Michael's taken over as CEO, the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dane County have grown their operating budget by almost 600%, have quadrupled the number of children and families served, have almost 10 times the number of employees, and have gone from 2 locations to 11 locations, including this beautiful new location here, the McKenzie Family Boys and Girls Club here in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, where we are today, that Michael calls a country club for kids. In fact, in 2015, the Boys and Girls Club of America actually named Michael's Dane County-based locations among the top 5 in the entire country. Today, Michael is going to share a story about how he's lived an extraordinary life, starting from very tough beginnings. Michael, it's my honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. God, that's one of the best introductions I ever heard.
Well, man, you've lived a great life. So, so much we want to get into. First of all, Michael, since, he's obviously achieved a lot in his life, but since June, he's actually lost 96 pounds. Is that correct?
Yep.
I mean, take us through that. Like, what are some of the things you've done? Like, how did you get started with that? What are some of the things you've done?
Yeah, so I really wanted to just take control over, my life. And so it started off with an app called Fat Secret. I started monitoring my micronutrients, monitoring how much sodium I was putting in my body, how much, cholesterol I was putting in my body, and just wanted to just make sure that that I was taking care of myself. So I started exercising, I started eating better. And then I did a little bit of keto, but I wasn't doing keto to the point where I was doing under 50 carbs a day. So I had took a baseline of all the food I was eating every day through this app. I was eating 4,000 calories a day, which I don't care how much exercise you do, you're not going to lose weight when you're eating that many calories. I was also eating 600 carbs a day. That's way too many carbs, and for an average sized man, you should be eating about 200 carbs. So I cut my carbs from about 600 to 150. I also was eating about, in terms of sodium, I was doing about 4,000 milligrams of sodium in my diet. I cut that down to 2,300 milligrams. And once I started to understand the math and the science and the numbers about it, I became very attentional about what I put in my body. So I would say the first 4 or 5 months, I lost about 70 pounds. And then I decided, I got my blood work done, went to go see my physician, and I started working out at a place called Carbon World Health, who also took my blood work, and I found that my cholesterol was high. My cholesterol was at 300, and they want you under 199. So I started to go on a whole food plant-based diet. Since then, I've dropped another like 40 pounds, and I went and had my blood work done by my primary care physician, and everything went down. My blood pressure went down, my cholesterol, and all my other levels are now in healthy ranges.
That's great.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Great.
And I still got a long way to go. I still, I'm still 300 plus pounds, so I want to get to about 260. So I still got some work to do. And I think it's going to take me about a year to do it, but I want to do it slowly. I want to do it very thoughtfully. I'm incorporating exercise, so I'm watching how much muscle mass that I'm putting into my body and how much protein, and just trying to live a healthier life so I could be of service to kids in this community, but also be of service to my kids and my family and my wife. And you can't do that effectively if you're not healthy.
Yeah, that's so great that you've taken control of that area of your life, and obviously, like you said, it'll have an impact on everyone else as well.
Absolutely.
So awesome. Before we get into your incredible story, I first want to ask what it's like for you to dedicate your life to serving others, because as we obviously just heard from some of those incredible statistics, you've had a huge impact on this community. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's be honest, as a nonprofit leader, you're focused less on income for yourself and more on others. So you're literally like giving your life for others. So what does it feel like to you to be able to make such a huge impact on people's lives?
Yeah, so it's all about how, in my opinion, how we're all here for a short period of time. So whether it's you're here for a year on earth or you're here for 110 years, we all have a window. And so I want my legacy to be, how do I utilize my life to change the lives of other people? I grew up in extreme poverty. I grew up in the projects. And I always knew from the time I became an adult that I wanted to be a nonprofit leader. And it didn't hit me until I was at the elementary school that I had graduated from, John F. Smith Elementary School on the west side of Chicago, when I saw the number of young people that had passed away and still are passing away to this day. And those statistics that I started hearing and seeing, I said, I want to be able to give back, but I want to learn how to lead. So I decided to go to school. I got a football scholarship to go to the University of Minnesota. I dropped out of school. I couldn't read. I couldn't write. I ended up getting accepted into Malcolm X College. Malcolm X College would not accept me as a regular student because I couldn't read and write at college proficiency. So I had to take 2.5 years of preparatory courses, and that was very humbling for me to go from going to school to a Big Ten university to a junior college senior not smart enough to be at our school, and it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. So it took me about 4.5 years to graduate from Malcolm X College. I then went to Chicago State University, and when I started learning about nonprofit leaders and those who were successful compared to those who were not, I learned that those who did not have business acumen and did not understand how to manage budgets, raise money. So I decided I was going to get all my degrees in business. I got my bachelor's in business, my master's in business, and I have about 20 certifications from Cornell University, the Indiana University at the Center for School of their Philanthropy. I got all these fundraising certifications. So I wanted to get the practical experience, but also the educational experiences to be able to put those practices into work and change people's lives. So I've spent the last 23 years of my life working for public school systems like Chicago and Philadelphia, nonprofit organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCAs. And while parts of these jobs are challenging, what I would tell you, I think I have one of the most rewarding jobs in this county. I enjoy getting up every single day, raising resources and helping to challenge the status quo for kids in our community.
So incredible. Yeah. The journey you've gone through to get to this, and the perspective that you have on this, I think, is just incredible.
Thank you.
So, speaking of kind of your story, I mean, you've overcome some unbelievable challenges growing up in one of the toughest areas of Chicago and without a father in your life. Let's give some people some context here. Like, what were things like growing up for you in the projects of Chicago?
Yeah, it was tough. I lived in an apartment 1605 in a high-rise. It was called the Abla Homes, the Village, and there was days that the elevators didn't work. There was bright spots, there was challenges. So let me start with the bright spots. The bright spots, I would say, there was a sense of community there. I remember walking in those buildings. You can go to Miss Jenkins' house, or you can go to Theola's house and borrow some butter or some Kool-Aid. I wouldn't dare go to one of my neighbors' house now. Actually, could I borrow some butter or Kool-Aid?
Sure.
So there was like this sense of community that I loved being there. But I also saw the impact that crack cocaine had on so many families in our community. I also saw the impact that gangs had on our community, and how young men that I went to school with that was brutally murdered and killed in the hallways of the buildings that I walked up and down the stairs to. I watched, have had family members and friends, young women who were raped, in those buildings. So it was a very, very, challenging environment. I saw many kids that I grew up with go to jail for 10, 15, 20 years. One of my childhood friends just got out of prison a year ago for murder and was in prison since I've been in 8th grade. Yes. And so I've watched, some of these things, and I always said, man, I don't want to go to jail. I don't want to go to prison. I want something better for my life. And I think I was blessed that I had the Boys and Girls Club in our community. There was a YMCA in our community. There was a guy by the name of Peter Goshes, a Greek-American guy who owned a grocery store, who gave me a job at 13. So I literally been working since, I'm 44 now. I've been working since I was 13 years old, and I worked at a local grocery store. When I went at the Boys and Girls Club, I was working at this grocery store. And I think because I lived in the projects, I lived there, but I was not there. I left every morning for school at 6 o'clock. I left school, went to the Boys and Girls Club, or I went to work, and my home became a resting place for me at night. Okay. And I think that was the big difference. My friends who were not in Boys and Girls Club and was not working, they started selling, some started selling drugs, some started getting involved in criminal activity. Unfortunately, many of them lost their lives. I've seen way too many of my friends, even in Chicago to this day, every time I turn on social media, somebody just last week, a young man I grew up with, shot and killed in front of his house. Oh, and every single, I would say almost every other month, I'm still feeling it and still seeing it. And unfortunately, our kids deal with this kind of trauma every day, whether they live in Madison or Chicago. Families are tied to. So I'm blessed and I'm privileged to be in a position to be able to use whatever influence I have and whatever network I have on behalf of Boys and Girls Clubs to pay it forward for young people and families that need us to lead.
Wow, I'm sure a lot of that stuff was incredibly difficult and challenging to go through. So with all that surrounding you, you said you found the Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, other places like that. Like, how challenging was it for you to kind of, buck the status quo and go and kind of find your own stuff? Like, were there always those temptations that were kind of pulling you back?
Yeah, of course. I mean, there was people that wanted me to sell drugs. There was people who, thought because of my size that, man, you should. I remember I had purchased a van, and I remember the guy in my neighborhood jumped in my van while I was driving with 2 AK-47s.
Wow.
And I would tell you, I was afraid, and he jumped in, and he was somebody that was known as a killer. And I remember he jumped in my vehicle, and he was like, drive me that way. And I was like, no, he said, I'm not going to ask you again, drive me that way. And I remember I was praying and hoping that those guys were not standing on that block. So just imagine if he would have pulled that trigger and they were out there and I was in that van and driving, my life would have changed just like that. I also remember as a young man, I had got stabbed and shot. And I remember, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to create the Focus Interruption Coalition here, which is a group of peer support specialists to help mediate crime when things happen. So I remember this young man shot me on the west side of Chicago. And I remember some of my friends saying, we got to retaliate. We got to take him out. And part of it was my ego was bothering. Like, I can't allow somebody to get away with this. And it was one of my peers who said, Mike, you got so much more to offer to our community. Don't go that route. Let it go. go move with your sister. You're bigger and you're better than this. I would not have heard that from anybody. No adult in my life at that time, I think, would have convinced me otherwise, but one of my peers did.
Oh my gosh.
And so,
how old were you at this time?
I probably was about 18 or 19.
Okay.
And so when all these murders started happening in Madison, and I saw, kids coming to the Boys and Girls Clubs who uncles and cousins and fathers were being killed, the people were coming to us asking to pay for their funeral. And we would try to assist in any way that we can. So I decided to work with a group of grassroots community leaders, and we put together this 15-point plan to have community leaders working with police officers. And it took us about 2 years to pull it off, but we got the city council to unanimously vote on it. And what birthed out of that was the Focus Interruption Coalition. And if you notice, 2 or 3 years ago when you saw all these murders happening every summer, it's kind of gone down because of this group working with the police department and its peers, younger people working with the police to help address some of these issues. And in this particular case, I believe that if it was not for one of my peers who kind of calmed me down, I probably would have pulled that trigger too and wouldn't be sitting in this seat that I'm in.
Wow, amazing how, like you said, how quickly your life can change from just decisions like that.
Yeah.
So I imagine that was, incredibly, again, challenging to go through. And, another challenge that you mentioned was school for you growing up. You mentioned it was kind of difficult for you in a traditional school setting. So, what were things like for you growing up in school, and what were the challenges that you faced?
Actually, I enjoyed school, man. I went to, Krieger Vocational High School on the west side of Chicago. It was a small school. It was one of the lowest performing schools in the state, but I don't know, I enjoyed it, met some really good people. I thought I was a smart kid, to be honest with you. So when I graduated, I got accepted into Indiana State University. I got my acceptance letter. They had a start date, and I convinced a friend of mine to drive me to Indiana State. I assumed that because I had an acceptance letter, I was in. All I had to do was show up. I was gravely mistaken. I got there. I thought I was going to have housing, and I remember just feeling crushed. Pulled up on this beautiful campus in Terre Haute, Indiana, and excited that I was going to start my college career, but didn't have a place to stay, hadn't did my financial aid, and I was devastated, man. That drive home back to Chicago was tough. So I went to this place called Ada S. McKinley, and it was a local nonprofit on the south side of Chicago. And they filled out some financial aid work for me. They talked to one of the assistant football coaches and wrestling coaches at the University of Minnesota, and I got accepted. And I had a garbage bag full of clothes. I remember my mom crying. They put me on this is the only time I think Amtrak still has first class, but I was sitting in it wasn't a regular seat, it was like a cabin. And I was just impressed. It had a bed in it, and I felt like a world-class student that they thought enough of me. So I had my garbage bag full of everything I owned. There was a couple of pair of pants and some T-shirts and some gym shoes. And I remember my mom crying, and I went off to the University of Minnesota. And that's where I started to feel like it was challenging. I went from a neighborhood that was 99.9% black to being in an environment that was 99.9% white. And I could not academically compete for the world of me. So I tried to take easier courses. I remember my first semester, my courses were introductory to wrestling. But I was taking classes like that, and I couldn't even pass those courses. So what ended up happening, I started wrestling, and my coach and a couple of players played a Ku Klux Klan joke on me, and they took me out in this dark cornfield and pretended to be Klans people. And at the time, I think I was 19, and I ended up suing the university. And I got $1 million. And I think after the lawyers got paid, I walked away with like $700,000. And so I felt like I was on top of the world. So I dropped out. I started a record label. I opened up a restaurant. I bought a bunch of cars. I came home the first day and gave away almost $200,000, and 6 months later, I was completely broke.
Oh, man.
And it was one of the most humbling experiences I ever experienced. And I would tell you, I thought about committing suicide at that time. I had bought a restaurant, and it was a 6,000 square foot restaurant.
And how old were you at this time?
I was probably 20 at this time. Okay. And I felt successful. I had all that money. People in the neighborhood was looking up. I had put out a rap album. And the last thing I had was this restaurant. I had closed it down. I had hired some family members. And my mother was a very, very religious woman. And I remember when I bought it, I had an office in the back, and she brought in this big picture of white Jesus. It was the biggest picture of white Jesus you'll ever see. And she put it in this frame, and she posted it on my office, like right by my office door. And I remember this restaurant was on Madison and Karloff on the west side of Chicago. And I remember when I closed it down, I had these steel gates, and somebody ripped up that gate like it was nothing and took everything out of there except with that picture of Jesus. Oh, and I remember walking in, and I was down like my last $1,000. I remember walking in, I had cut my insurance, and I laid on the floor and I just cried. And just so happened the place where I lay, there was some knives on the floor, it was paper. So just imagine you walk in, it's air blowing throughout, it's papers flying everywhere. Yeah. And this picture of white Jesus was sitting right by my door. And I remember just sitting on this crate, and I laid down for a minute. I got on this crate, and I was just like, how did I dropped out of school. I blew through $700-some thousand. I am a complete failure. And I remember this vein, and I started like picking at it with a knife, and I just started looking at that picture, and just something just came over me. And it was like, this is actually going to make you stronger. This is not your bottom. And I would tell you that experience was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. Because what it taught me was I didn't earn that money, so I didn't respect it. I also didn't do the proper research in terms of, from a business development perspective. I didn't spend it. Like, if you invest in a business, you can't just leave it. I was never in that restaurant. I handed it over to somebody else. I expected them to run it. And I wasn't prepared and ready for it. Then I started a music business. I was doing too much at one time. And so that's why I wanted to go get business degrees. So now I understand how to manage budgets. I know how to do projection. That's why we went from $1 million organization to $7 million. Yeah. Because I understand how to manage resources now. And I didn't know how to do that at 18, 19 years old.
Wow. I mean, a lot happening there, both good and bad. And, there are a couple things I want to pick out of there of things you said. First of all, you mentioned it a little bit already, but I know this obviously made national news at the time, was the incident at Minnesota with the wrestling team and the wrestling coach. So if you're okay with sharing that, kind of walk me through what happened, because I know that created a lot of tension.
Yeah, so it was on Halloween night. I think it was October 31st, 1993. And I remember, and this coach is a Facebook friend of mine now. I forgave him, and, things happened, and I think I had just won. I won an important competition. I think it was one of the fastest pins in the school's history. I beat some guy from Iowa, and they wanted to celebrate it. So I remember one of the players said, "Man, coach, want to hang out with you." And when your coach asks you to hang out, like, you just don't turn that down. So I remember we drove over, somebody gave me a ride to his house. And as we went to his house, there's a show called, it was Kunta Kinte. It was on this tree, and he was being whipped. I didn't really pay any attention, but I thought it was kind of odd it was on while we were there. So we get in the car. It was the coach. I was in front. There was another African-American player in the back and a white player behind the coach. And I remember we were driving down this dark cornfield road, and it was just pitch black. And I remember seeing 6 or 7 guys in this Klan's outfit, and this cross was on fire, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. And the coach turned around, and pretty much it told us that we kept straight, it probably was a rally or something happening. So he turned the car around, and then he looped it again, and then he got out. And he said, "Hey, I'm Coach," I don't want to repeat his name, "Coach such and such. So he got out the car, and the other white player got out, and then all we heard was, "Give us the N word." And then that's why I got scared. Yeah. Joe was a much smaller guy. I was a 275-pound wrestler. I think Joe was like maybe 160. All I saw was the back of Joe, white sneakers, kicking dust. He was gone. So all I heard was click, click, boom. The coach falls to his knees, looks back, and tells me to run for my life, and he falls out. And I didn't know it was a joke, but it was ketchup on his hand that he had smeared across his shirt. And I ran back to the car. And the way that the car was angled and the way that I was standing, I didn't have enough room to run to the driver's seat. So I tried to run to the passenger seat. Okay. They opened the door and it was locked. And they started running towards me. Oh my gosh. So I took my hand, and the car was running. I took my hand, punched through the window, and it didn't break. The second time, I knew I was running out of time. I took my hip and just took all my weight and took my elbow and just rammed my hand through the window, and then it broke. At this point, I could see them now approaching the car. So I dive in, I take the brake and hit the brake and throw the car in drive with my feet hanging out the window. So literally I'm driving like with one foot on the gas and my hand like this, looking up because there's a river on one side and then there's like trees and stuff on the other side, but it's a lot of ponds because Minnesota is like the state of 10,000 lakes. So I was afraid I was going to run off the road. So I got further enough that I felt like I could pull myself up. So I pulled myself up, and then I jumped in the car, and I was so afraid that I pulled into this gas station. And I remember later hearing the 911 call. I scared the crap out of this young lady who was working at night. So the car drove into, I never put the car in drive, I literally drove into the gas station. And then I ran in and said the Ku Klux Klan killed my coach and one of my friends. Yeah. So I called the police. Before the police come there, some of my coaches a coach and some of the players come in and say Happy Halloween. And I just could not believe what happened. So I'm like, where's Joe at? And they like, get back in the car, let's go. And I just didn't trust anybody at that point. Yeah. So at that time, I was pledging this fraternity called Omega Psi Phi. And I called one of the guys that was online with me at the time. And within 10 minutes, I think 15, 20 Qs showed up. And then next day, it just made national news. And I chose not to do any interviews. I kind of stayed quiet. And so I didn't talk about it for 20 years. Then a couple of years ago, I wrote about it in the Cap Times. Wow.
I mean, obviously not a very funny joke that they played there. Yeah. I mean, I know, and I did, read that article that you talked about, and just talk about, like, from that, how hard it was for you to, like, what happened after that? Like, how did you move forward with that?
Yeah, I had never really dealt with race relation issues at that age, growing up in a predominantly African-American community. And so it was very challenging because everybody on campus knew it was me. So you had a lot of students of color who wanted to be of assistance. Then you had some white students that wanted to help. And then you had some people that were very angry about the whole situation, and I was very guarded. And in that article, I talked about, actually was a young woman from Wisconsin who in class had wanted to touch my skin. So at that age, I thought she was flirting with me. We were sitting in class, and she was like, she was rubbing my arm. She's like, I never touched a black person before. And I was like, okay, a little weird, but sure. So I let her rub on my arm, and then she asked if she can rub my butt, and I was like, yeah, sure. And from there, she had asked me if I had a tail. And I was just like, what the hell is wrong with people? And I completely I lost it. And I went off on her. So there was this interracial girl that was close to both, probably more so closer to me, but knew this other young lady. And she had pulled me to the side and she said, Mike, I watched the whole thing. As crazy as that was, I don't think she's a racist. I think she's ignorant. I know a little bit about her background. And I was just like, that's crazy. She thinks I'm a goddamn rat or something. Like, I just couldn't believe it. So she sat down with me and told me how this young girl had grew up on a farm. She had never been around black people before. She shared with me that her father was racist and that she had fell out with him. And these were things that was instilled in her by her parents. So in her mind, from what she had learned from her, she was just doing some fact finding. I still didn't believe it. Right. So she convinced me to sit down with her. And that was the very first conversation I had ever had in my life around cultural competency, race, racism. And I think we met for about 4 hours. And it was probably one of the best conversations we cried, we talked. She shared with me some of the implicit biases she experienced as a young woman growing up on a farm, and the racism that her grandparents and her parents had instilled in her. And then for her to come on a campus like that and meet people like me was a rewarding experience for her. And I would say it was an experience for me, as well, because I had never had an honest conversation like that with a white person. And that was my first experience.
Wow. Yeah, I imagine just all of that stuff that happened, and then this incident with the young woman was a lot to take in. And like you said, that was really the first time you had discussions like this about race. I'm sure a lot of this has kind of helped shape who you've become and being able to understand every side as well.
It has. Yeah, it's, when you talk about race and politics, and you look at where we're at as a country, it's a very divisive, very messy conversation, and you have to be very, very skilled in terms of how you deal with those conversations. And I always tell people, if you really want to learn, seek understanding instead of being understood, right? And look at and put yourself in the shoes of the folks who might feel marginalized. But also I know that there's people that live in the majority in our community also may not understand some of the issues and may also want to feel like they want to give back but don't necessarily know how to, right?
Sure.
And so I think that there has to be bridge builders, but there also have to be people that can ruffle some feathers, because there is institutional racism that occur. There is challenges that people of color face, not only in our city, but across the country. And when you look at all the data around whether it's school suspension, you look at health, you look at unemployment, you look at graduation rates, Black men fall at the bottom of every last one of those categories. And why is that? And we got to begin to shift the opportunity gap in order to solve some of these critical issues in our community.
Yeah, imagine, again, that has really helped for you to go through that, and I think you have a really good perspective on it. So as long as we're on the subject, opportunity gaps, so what are some of the ways that we can shift that? Yeah,
so one of the things that I think we by investing in young people, and that's why we built this facility as a preschool. We have census tracts in Dane County where only 47% of our kids are prepared and ready for kindergarten. We know as a country, we build by the third grade. The federal government look at test scores of kids in third grade and determine where they're going to build and enhance prisons in individual communities based on the reading scores of third grade kids. And so, one, we have to make sure our kids are prepared and ready for kindergarten, that they don't fall backwards. So a huge barrier to early childhood education is cost. When you look at the average child care weekly rates of $250, and if you have 2 kids, you can forget about it. They're talking $500 a week, $2,000 a month. So imagine if you're underemployed, how do you come up with $2,000 a month for child care? Huge issue that we have to address in our community. And that's why we built this facility to help mitigate some of those issues for parents. Two, one of the reasons we have over 1,000 kids in college right now. And one of the reasons we invest so much in the schools is that you can't transform kids' lives by simply running after school programs. So we're trying to touch kids during the school, after school, and on weekends. We want to be able to educate kids so they can come out of high school reading and writing at proficiency so they don't go through some of the challenges that I want to. So I think investing in being able to do that. Two, I think people got to be willing to give of their talent. So time, talent, and treasure.
Okay.
If you're in a position to give of time, join a local board, be on a local committee, volunteer at a local Boys and Girls Club, a YMCA, after school program, a community center. Volunteer and learn and grow and give back to the community that way. And talent may be coaching. It could be offering your expertise, whether it's finance, HR, real estate, to local nonprofits that's doing work in this community. And then for those who are blessed with their treasure, investing in somebody's life, whether it's through an organization or directly utilizing your wealth and your resources to change somebody else's life. And we do that here at Boys and Girls Clubs. And there's other groups that do it, as well. And I just think as a community, those who are the most marginalized, those who traditionally have not done well, I think we got to pay special attention to those groups and figure out a way to not give people a handout, but to give them a hand up and to create the right programs that's going to help people thrive for their families and their children. And that's why we feed kids here every day. We don't want kids going home hungry. That's why we provide tutorial support in the classrooms to make sure that kids can read and write at proficiency. That's why we do field trips at Boys and Girls Clubs to make sure that kids are exposed to the environment and all the great things that the state of Wisconsin and this country has to offer. And that's why we take kids to D.C., we take kids to Florida, we have kids in camp in Baltimore, at the Cal Ripken Foundation. We set those things up to expose kids to opportunities. And then I would say the last thing is we call these country clubs for kids. Make sure that our clubs are bright, that they're clean, and that when kids walk in, they feel good, about our spaces. And that's what I've tried to provide as a servant leader of this organization, utilizing the skills that I've learned over the years to not only give back to kids, but to give back to and make our community holistically better by partnering with other people and using our talent to make our city and our region better.
A lot of valuable stuff there. I like the time, talent, and treasure part, and sounds like the partnerships with other people has been really huge, and have everyone working together toward the same cause.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely want to get into more of that stuff. So I want to continue your story right now too. So after the Minnesota incident, so you obviously got some money out of that. Lost it all. We're at kind of a low point in your life, but you still saw this is not the end for me. So from there, after, like you talked about the white Jesus, you got robbed. Where do you go from there? How do you move forward?
So I think it was a turning point for me was I remember I was at a bus stop on my way to Malcolm X College. And some of the same guys that I would hang with, buy drinks for, buy clothes with, I was at a bus stop. I was so broke, I couldn't even afford a coat. Jeez. And I remember, and so my nickname was Boobaloo. And I remember standing at the bus stop, and one of the guys pulled up in his car and was like, "Yo, what up, Boobaloo?" And I was like, "Man, can you give me a ride to school?" They're like, No, we own something. I'm like, "Man, it's cold out here, snowing." And they like, "Man, sorry, G, gotta keep moving." And that crushed me, man. I was like, wow. And I said, you know what? That just gave me motivation. I said, man, I'm gonna go to school. I'm gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna work my way out of these projects. I don't know how, but as Malcolm X once said, when I went to school there, education is your passport to your future. And that was a quote that just stuck with me. So I started, this guy that I worked for, Peter Goshes, he lived in a suburb called Glenview, Illinois, and I had never been to the suburbs before. And I remember he took me out to his house for a weekend. And I remember leaving that Sunday, and I just cried. I was like, man, it was just so inspiring. He had a swimming pool in his house. His kids had their own beds. It was just like, now that I think about it, it wasn't like the big, like when I think about like houses I've been to now, but back then it felt like a mega mansion.
Oh, sure.
And it probably was like a $400,000 house, but it felt like a $10 million house. And I remember going in, he said, if you go to college, you work hard, you can someday provide for your family. Mm-hmm. And that just stuck with me, man, over the years. And I would say that inspiration kind of just gave me some hope that, yep, I'm college material. I could provide one day, and I could utilize my experiences to give back to the community. So that as some people would say, I lived in the gutter. And when you live in the gutter, it can really get no lower than that outside of you losing your health. So I was like, if I stay healthy, if I continue to give back, I think I'll live a fulfilled life. And so those challenges I saw as opportunities to be able to grow. And I'm glad and honored that I had those experiences.
Wow. I mean, I think it's pretty incredible to have that shift in perspective. And, kind of while we're on that topic too, so I was going to bring this up later, but I think now would be a really good time, would be a lot of people grow up in really challenging situations, and a lot of people don't end up making a success of their lives and end up, kind of going down a bad path. Like, how in those moments are you able to shift your perspective and see those as an opportunity to grow versus the world is against me?
Yeah, I think sometimes kids I could have been easily one of those kids that could have been incarcerated. I could think of dozens of opportunities, whether it was the guy who jumped in my car with their machine gun. From the time when I was a kid, we would throw refrigerators out the window. It was crazy stuff. Like, we were literally going to vacant apartments, throw refrigerators out the window.
Oh my God.
And try to hit people. Just stupid stuff that we did as kids, driving around in stolen cars. So it was unacceptable, but I would say there was not enough role models to really steer us in a different way. So I would tell a young person that's living in a situation like that right now, that it might seem dark and gloomy right now. And some people will say, just pull up your bootstraps and just get to work. But some kids and families don't even have the boots to pull up their bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And so I would say, try to hang around positive people, try to stay engaged and active in activities at school. Mm-hmm. If you have deficiencies like I had in reading and math, seek help and humble your spirit until you get it. And I believe while there are forces that might cause harm to you, stay positive and just try to connect and be around forces of good. And I believe when you do good, when you put in the hard work, that good opportunities will come. Mm-hmm. But I also think there are young people who have falsely and unjustly have been put into our criminal justice system. I've seen and heard of situations like that. And those are the most challenging ones. But we also have kids who do stupid stuff that get in trouble. I think about there's a lot of kids in Madison right now stealing cars, and they're doing really, really reckless things. But I also remember when I was 13, I did the same shit. Excuse my language. And I was just lucky that I didn't get caught. I didn't hurt anybody, but I ran in some of those same circles. But there was a mentor in Boys and Girls Club that just exposed me to so many positive things that I didn't want to go to jail. And so I began to divert that energy, and I started playing football. I started playing basketball. I ran for student government, president. And once I started getting involved in that, I didn't want no trouble around me. I didn't want any negative influences around me. It was almost like toxic to my spirit to be around it. I bet. And that would be my advice to young people today.
So it's really about who you surround yourself with. It seems to be everything, whether it's, like I said, joining an organization like the Boys and Girls Club, finding other positive people around you really seems to make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think one of the challenges we face, and there was challenges when I grew up as a 90s kid, people, when we talk about time and talent, there's a lot of young people in this community that can use the talent of a mentor. And you got groups like Big Brothers and Big Sisters who have a waiting list. Why is that? And we need people who can step up and be willing. Like, you might think, oh, I'm busy. I got kids. And you'll be surprised the number of volunteers that come to me and say, man, I thought I was given to Boys and Girls Club. In reality, Boys and Girls Club has helped fulfill my life.
Wow.
And it has so much more purpose and meaning to it. And it's just refreshing, like when you hear people say things like that. And I look at Jenny Santek, our outgoing board president, or chairwoman-elect. I watched all the stuff she did over the holidays and how she got her friends involved. And she was one of the people who told me the same thing. She said, I thought I had a very fulfilled life until I started doing some of this stuff with Boys and Girls Club. And it motivates you to get up. And so here's a woman who helped us give a $4,000 tip to a waitress, lobbied all her friends. Like, people thought that money was coming from Boys and Girls Club. So for the record, that $4,000 tip we gave to a waitress came from donors of Boys and Girls Clubs. And then they turned around. There was a woman living in a Walmart parking lot. They put her into housing and found her a job. Wow. And so it's little stories like that people don't necessarily hear every day.
Yeah.
That when you engage volunteers the right way, they pay it for others. And so I want to be that bridge builder that builds build a bridge to those who might be struggling in life, to those who may have a little bit more influence and wealth, and making those connections to help to improve the overall condition of our community.
Right. So bring everyone together to, whether it's people, like you said, of influence, whether it's people from the Boys and Girls Club and other nonprofits and other people in the community. Absolutely. Bring everyone together to work toward that common cause.
Absolutely. And we may not always agree. So this morning I put out an op-ed piece about welcoming our new superintendent. There were some people that don't feel he's the right leader for our district, and I put out an op-ed welcoming him to our city, and he's now the leader for 27,000 students. But there are some valid concerns that communities of color, particularly the African American community, has raised, and I also respect their views. Now, I may not necessarily agree with some of the things that were shared, but I wanted to offer my perspective to say, hey, we welcome you. At the same time, we're going to hold you accountable for the work that you need to do for our kids. And there's going to be times that people agree to disagree. But I think if people are civil and respectful to one another, we move forward as a community.
Yeah, so important there, I think, what you just said. And then, again, I want to get more into, I have a couple other questions about that too, but I want to start from, so we were talking about you lost the money, and then you got connected with some people who kind of helped you. So from there, how did you get started in the workforce, and how did you get to where you are today?
Point. So I would say, man, I learned a lot from this guy named Paul Vallis, who was probably one of the most respected urban school superintendents in the United States. Paul hired me at Chicago Public Schools. He ran for governor, joined his campaign. He went to Philadelphia as the school superintendent. I followed him there. So I would say I had an 8-year internship, paid internship for one of the best education leaders, in my opinion, in the United States. He was so successful. George Bush asked him to be the Secretary of Education. Wow. Bill Clinton talked about him in his State of the Union address. Arnie Duncan, the former Secretary of Education, our offices is right, and we both worked for this guy. And so he's produced a lot of school superintendents in this country. I watched him up close for 8 years. And I learned so much. He was the former budget director for the city of Chicago. He was smart, intelligent, educated, cared about the community, and I got a front seat to that. And I learned a lot from him. I remember I wanted to get my degree in nonprofit management, and he was solely against it. He's like, Mike, you're gonna get that experience here at the school district. Go get you an MBA. And I'll be honest with you, I was struggling with the MBA because of the math, economics, and statistics.
Sure.
And what he did was he said, I'll ask our CFO to identify somebody to tutor you. And that's how I got through my MBA program. I worked at the school district during the day. I went to school at night. And when I took those classes, the comptroller for the school district became my tutor.
Oh, really?
And that's how he's since passed away. And if it was not for him, I would not have got. And I would say my wife too. My wife was a chemist at the time, and my wife is really, really good in math. But it's hard when your spouse is trying to. At least my wife. My wife is very independent, opinionated, and was screaming at me all the time. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get his tutor responsibility to somebody else.
Spouse, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's great. You got that great experience with him. And then I know you moved a couple other places before you got to the Boys and Girls Club. So what were those couple other places, and how did you transition to the Boys and Girls Club in Madison, Wisconsin?
So I spent the 8 years with him, and he was about to go to New Orleans. So Hurricane Katrina hit. The governor had asked him to come to New Orleans. He told me about it and wanted me to serve as his chief of staff.
And this was when he was in Philadelphia.
And that's when he was in Philadelphia. And I pretty much agreed without telling my wife. And I told my wife, she said, I'm not moving to New Orleans. We're not moving to New Orleans. And I was like, Toya, I got to follow him. And she said, no, it's time for you to spread your wings and go do something different. And I'm going to be honest with you, I was nervous about it because for 8 years, I've given pretty much my life to working with this guy. So I started to apply for jobs. Actually, I just got my MBA, and I applied for like 5 jobs. And one I didn't even think I was qualified for. I was the vice president of the YMCA in St. Louis. I applied, I think, on a Sunday night, and Monday morning they called me.
Wow.
And I was like, whoa. I go down for an interview, and they literally within a week offered me the job.
Wow.
I was nervous because there was a $200,000 a year fundraising goal tied to it. And at that point, I had some fundraising, but not $200,000 worth. And I was scared. And so I went to my CEO. I said, and he was about a year from taking his job. And he said, look, Mike, if it don't work out, I'll either be here or in New Orleans. I'll hire you back. Go. And that gave me the confidence to do it.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I went there and I killed it. I did that first year, I raised $1 million.
Wow.
And I gained so much confidence that I was like, I'm ready to be a CEO. And I remember my CEO at the time was like, Mike, you got 2 years in. Don't leave. You're like, I think I was 26, 27 at the time. And I was like, nah, I can be a CEO. and so at this point, this search firm had sent me this job spec in Indiana of a psychiatric hospital for kids. And at that point, I didn't care if I was a CEO of a janitor company or a CEO of any kind of nonprofit. I didn't care. I just wanted to be the CEO.
Sure.
So this hospital, it was a psychiatric residential treatment facility for kids. And I just didn't do my homework. I was excited about it. It was a beautiful campus. It was almost like a mini university. It was all these buildings. And I got caught up in the shine of it.
Sure.
CEO, and they offering all these little perks. And I get there, and it wasn't a bad job, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. It pretty much, when you look at residential secure facilities, it's pretty much a baby penitentiary before you go to like the Adi home or to jail. Mm-hmm. And I struggled, man, seeing kids incarcerated and locked up. so many young kids. And then I really had no control over, like when judges would sentence kids there,
Sure.
I had no real, like some kids would get heavily medicated and I just didn't like it.
Sure.
And I felt like I had the authority to change. So I remember telling our board president, I said, I had only been there maybe 8 months. I said, y'all probably should do a search. I don't have a job yet. I haven't even started looking, but I don't think I'm the right leader for this organization. So it took me about a year to land something. The mayor in Philadelphia got elected. He was a city council person. Mayor Michael Nutter got elected. I was on the Police Athletic League board for PAL. The commanding officer became the commissioner. And she said, we run one of the largest, I got appointed to run one of the largest recreation centers in the country. We're about to merge with Parks and Rec. Would you consider coming as the deputy commissioner of parks? There's 400 and some parks. There's like 600 recreation centers. We have more swimming pools than any municipality. And I'm like, how do you turn that down? Right. Plus, I had strong ties in Philadelphia. So I knew coming in that for at least 2 years, I would be the deputy commissioner of ops. Mm-hmm. So I take it on. And it was a great role. I even oversaw the vet stadium that the Packers played in that was part of the park system. Yeah. And I loved it there, but my wife hated Philadelphia. We stayed in this little 400 square foot apartment. We was too far from Chicago. And then so the merger happened. And so I was a deputy commissioner. There was a deputy commissioner, 3 for each department. So you had 6 people that was merging into one. So they appointed a deputy mayor to oversee Parks and Rec. The 2 commissioners became deputies, and they asked me to be the chief of staff. And I didn't want to become the chief. I did not want to be a chief of staff. Right. At that point, I asked the deputy mayor, I said, what does it mean to be a chief of staff? Like, what comes with that portfolio? And they were still too early in the process. And I was like, nah, I want to be the commissioner. But I understood that he couldn't bump the commissioner down to a deputy. Right. I mean, to under a deputy when they were already commissioner. So I understood the politics of it. So I decided that, so I left there. And then I came 10 years ago to Boys and Girls Club. So I had got an offer to become the Boys and Girls Club CEO, and I also got an offer to become a vice president for a private dental practice that actually paid twice as much as Boys and Girls Club. And I had got the offer from Mary Burke about a day before, and the next day I got the offer from this private practice. The salary was more on the private practice, and I accepted it. I remember, but I didn't say no to Boys and Girls Club because my heart was with Boys and Girls Club. Okay. So I went to the orientation and I sat there and I was yawning. And the CEO of that practice was a huge donor to the park system. Okay. And I remember sitting there and I said, why did I take this job? And my heart was here in Wisconsin. Yeah. So that was one of the toughest because I really respect this guy. So I called him. And I said, his name was Dr. Kaplan. I said, Dr. Kaplan. And Dr. Kaplan was a very, very wealthy man, well-respected in the state of Pennsylvania. And he was upset with me. And I resigned. And I came into the job at Boys and Girls Club. 6 months, he would not talk to me. His wife called me one day and she said, I truly respect the decision you made. Yeah. And I had a conversation with her for about an hour. So he flew his private plane to Wisconsin, met with me, made a nice donation to Boys and Girls Club, and then asked me to set up his family foundation. Wow. And so for I actually just got off his board about 2 weeks ago. I was the chair of his HR committee, helped him. Our COO here at Boys and Girls Club became the president of his foundation. And it's been a great 10-year ride so far. So I've been here 10 years this month. With Boys and Girls Clubs.
Incredible, and I'm sure it was a very tough decision in the moment to turn down the higher paying job to do this. But like you said, your heart was in it, and I know we got about less than 10 minutes here, so I want to talk a little bit more about your tenure here. So you've really stepped out in the community as a leader, not just in the Black community, but among people of all color. And you're not afraid to tackle complex and tough issues. Mm-hmm. For example, in 2015. A 19-year-old unarmed Black man was fatally shot by a white police officer in Madison. Mm-hmm. It was among the time when there were a lot of tensions between the Black community and police officers. And Police allege the officer shot him after the victim punched him in the head, responded to a report the victim was running in and out of traffic, and allegedly tried to strangle multiple people. So right away after this incident happened, rather than taking sides, you stepped in and sought to bring peace and understanding on both sides. You had the police chief, the family of the victim, the mayor, the governor, community leaders, all these people involved. You step in as a leader at a time when the community and country were searching for answers. How have you been able to step in as a leader in such tough and complicated situations like that? And how have you developed the confidence to tackle these challenging issues?
Yeah. My mom always taught me when you do right will come by you. But I also learned when you try to be a bridge builder like bridges, you get walked on. So I would say in that incident, I tried to bring people together and I got walked on, stepped on, stumped on.
Yeah.
And I remember some people, I'll start with the governor. This is a heavily Democratic region. And I remember calling the governor's office and I said, you need to do something about this and you need to lend your voice and say something. And I want to meet with you right away. And I told this to his assistant. The governor called me like in 10 minutes and said, can we do breakfast? And I got to tell you, there were some people not happy about me meeting with him. And people were taking shots at me behind the scenes, publicly. And so I just decided that I was going to publicly put my agenda out there, what I was meeting with the governor about. And then I held a press conference afterwards just to be transparent on what I talked to him about. So I had asked him at the time to call Tony Robinson's mother and apologize and offer his condolences, and he did it that day. I also was criticized for trying to bring the police department. I brought Chief Chief, what's our former chief name? Koval. I brought Chief Koval to Tony Robinson. What happened, I got a Facebook message from Tony Robinson's mother, friend, inboxed me, and I didn't read it. And I just left a fundraiser for Clean Care to raise money for One City Schools. And I remember getting home and the president of Local 311 had called me and said there was an officer-involved shooting. So I said, why are you calling me? And he said, Mike, this city's going to need your leadership. I can't tell you all the details, but I need you to trust me and head down to the chief's office. So Malin is somebody I really respect, and I didn't know what I was walking into. But as I got in the car, I went to go return the call of the young lady who left me the Facebook message, and she told me the whole thing. So I didn't go to Chief Koval's office. I went straight to Tony Robinson's mother's house, and I saw how angry, and rightfully so, his family, his friends. I saw tears on people's faces. I saw the devastation that his mother was going through, and I witnessed it. So I went to Chief Koval's office. I met with him before he had a press conference. I said, why don't you, this is probably 1 o'clock in the morning, by the time me and him got to sit down again, I said, why don't you jump in the car with me, take your gun off, take your badge off, take your bulletproof vest off. And his subordinates was not feeling that and was like, Chief, we advise you not to do that.
Sure.
So what he ended up doing, he met me halfway. He followed me there in a different vehicle. There was an unmarked car. He took his vest off, took all his police gear off. Tony Robinson's mother didn't want to meet with him, but the grandmother did, and the grandfather. And I brought up Anthony Cooper with me, and we just prayed in the middle of the street. And I wanted to just connect those families. And I also brought the mayor with me. The mayor actually rode in the car with me. And I wanted the mayor to just kind of see what this family was experiencing. So I tried to bring people together, but politics got in the way. I started trying to raise money to support the burying this young man. And when you try to bring people like that together, people take shots at you. And I felt it, but if I had to do it all over again, I would do the same thing over and over again. I met with Tony Robinson's grandmother the other day, and she actually was like, as we look back, we're just so thankful for how you intervened and how Boys and Girls Club tried to bring the community together and the support that you provided, to our family. And sometimes when you try to do the right thing, you might become a casualty or you might get walked on. And I've learned to just be okay with people criticizing you. If you're leading and if you're trying to lead the right way, there's going to be people who will agree with you and people who won't. So I had African American leaders that didn't agree with what I was doing. I had police groups that didn't necessarily, and supporters who didn't necessarily agree with what I was doing. I had donors and stakeholders who was saying, I'll never get a Boys and Girls Clubs again because of what you're doing. But I also had a fair share of people that was sending me letters every day and encouraging me. And that gave me hope during that particular time.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, you in that situation, like you said, it's not, you've never been afraid to voice your opinion clearly. And that's, I think, something that makes you very remarkable, is the fact that other people are telling you not to do something from all sides and you still do what you know in your heart is right.
It gets you in trouble sometimes, though. I would tell you, when you speak from your heart, it can hurt you sometimes. Like, I'll give an example. Like, when the incident happened, I fought with two very influential mayors, the mayor of Fitchburg and the mayor of Madison, over funding, and it was very public. With the mayor of Madison, it was about all the killings that was taking place, and whether or not the city was going to fund peer support and address some of these issues. And I was so passionate about it at the time that I started attacking him publicly through the press and calling him out. And I remember one headline was like, I had a reporter had texted me something that was not accurate, and I said, he's an effing liar.
Oh, really?
and they put that in the paper, and I was like, oh my God. So I remember one of my board members called, like, Mike, we love you. We believe you're on the right side of this. Just don't curse in the newspaper like that.
Sure.
So I've just learned sometimes when you're passionate and when you're given influence and some power, for what much is given, much is due, and you have to be very careful and responsible for what you lend your name to and how you message things to the public. And even like with the Fitchburg situation, when the mayor had taken out money for all kids in the city of Fitchburg, I was ticked off about that. I was like, how can you not invest? And it would no longer became whether or not you support Boys and Girls Club, but the language was, we're taking out all funding for kids. And I felt like at the time somebody needed to speak up. And so I brought 600 people out to the city council and ruffled a lot of feathers and lost some support from Boys and Girls Club, but ended up gaining a lot of support, as well. If I had to reflect and do all that over again, there's probably different strategies that I would have used, but I still would have advocated as passionately as I did then. I would still do the same thing now, but I probably wouldn't be the face of it. I would have probably figured out a way to communicate that without me going so hard charging directly at the mayor.
Yeah, that's good that I think you've also reflected and seen like, okay, well, I am very passionate, but how could I have gone about it in a different way? And I think obviously that speaks to you as a leader to have the ability to review what you've done and then kind of analyze it and then figure out how you can do it better the next time too.
And I would tell you, I was glad I left Madison to go to Cincinnati. When I left here, I think I left very unhealthy. I was getting up 1 o'clock in the morning when there was shootings and people calling me. I felt obligated to respond to every single thing. And I was on 18, 19 boards and committees. And my wife was questioning, like, man, you spend more time at work and on all these committees than you do with your family. And it was not healthy. So going to Cincinnati.
And just for the listeners, so in 2018, for everyone listening, Michael, you left the Boys and Girls Club of Dane County to pursue what you said at the time was your dream job as the head of the United Way of Cincinnati, which I know is one of the bigger United Ways in the country. You ended up leading that organization for 4 months and then left. And I can let you obviously explain that. I know we have a couple minutes here, a little bit more. But why don't you continue with what you're saying?
Yeah, I was just in a position. It was very, very public. I decided to resign. And again, United Way is a good organization. That wasn't the right organization for me. And it wasn't the right community for me, right? Very Republican, very conservative views, conservative thinking. And, I'm used to working in more liberal communities. And I came there, I'm a enterprise CEO, right? So I get there and I'm like, I'm gonna make all these changes. But what I learned was that when you're responsible for giving away $60 million a year, there's a lot of personalities that come with that. A lot of people that want your time, a lot of people that's lobbying you for support. And I just missed, and I ran a tri-state United Way, so I was always in 3 different states moving, right? I missed being connected to a community. So when I resigned, it was public, boys and girls. I was actually going to work for American Family. I had got an opportunity to go there, and then my board learned about that I was leaving, and they had an emergency vote. It was unanimous, and I came back. But coming back I took a year to really reflect on how I wanted to lead in this city. So I wanted to first focus on my personal health. 2, I wanted to focus only on Boys and Girls Club and make sure our team was strong and our infrastructure was strong. Because I think when I left for that, I was pretty much gone for about 9 months because I took a couple of months off. And I really wanted to reintroduce myself to the team and the board. So I was very intentional about how I spent my time. So it's now been about a year and 3 or 4 months. And we had the best year ever in the history of our club. We grew our staff, grew our budget, grew the number of kids and families that we've served, have over 1,000 kids in college, over 200 kids graduated from high school, and have done some really, really rewarding work in this community and built a multi-million-dollar club.
That's so incredible that you've been able to do that, Michael. I know we've got about a minute or 2 left here. So I have 2 more quick questions for you. Why don't you give me like your 30-second answer to each of them? So first of all, people listening to this, they're like, how can I help and get involved with the Boys and Girls Club in my community? What would you say to those people?
Go to 2 things. We got Bike for Boys and Girls Club coming up. So 2 things. We got Shamrock Shuffle coming up on Saturday, March 15th. Register for that if you want to ride a 5K, 10K to support Boys and Girls Club. If you want to volunteer, time, talent, or treasure, go to www.bgcdc.org. If you have kids, you can enroll your kids in our preschool program in Sun Prairie. You can register your kids at Boys and Girls Clubs. And so call us and we will find a way to connect you to the work that we're doing.
Awesome. And those listening, that's in Madison, Wisconsin. Those who are listening outside the area, there are plenty of Boys and Girls Clubs in other areas that you can help as well. And then the last question, Michael, when it's all said and done, you've lived an impactful life. How do you want to be remembered?
Well, that's a great question. I probably got 44, so I probably got about 21 years to work. I hope that when I go in front of the pearly white gates, that my God would say, you've changed a lot of lives. You made a difference. Welcome to the palace.
Incredible, Michael, again.
Yep.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.